My name is Lucy, and I've spent most of my life in the shadow of my older sister, Angela. Growing up, Angela was always the golden child. She excelled in school, landed prestigious internships, and built a successful career in tech. She seemed to have everything figured out while I struggled to find my footing. I didn't fit into the mold of what our parents had envisioned, and honestly, I felt like I was always disappointing them. As for me, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my life for a long time. I dabbled in various interests: art, writing, trying to start small businesses, but nothing really stuck. I was often the quieter one in the family, compared to Angela's dominant presence. While she was out there pursuing her dreams, I was more likely to stay home and brood over my own inadequacies. Then I met Derek. Derek was different. He didn't care that I wasn't the shining star like Angela. We met at a tech conference. I was there as a guest speaker, sharing a few thoughts on digital innovation, and Derek was sitting in the back, looking like someone who just stumbled into the wrong room. He wasn't there to network or rub elbows with anyone. He was just genuinely interested in the topic. We talked after my session, and we hit it off immediately. He was humble, down to earth, and refreshingly unpretentious. Unlike my sister, Derek had no need to show off. He was content in his own skin, and we spent hours talking about everything from technology to personal ambitions. We got married 2 years later. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Angela seemed to always have everything handed to her, I had found someone who was just as grounded and genuine as I always wanted to be. Derek and I balanced each other out, and it was one of the first times in my life I felt truly at peace with who I was. But the peace didn't last. Angela, as expected, wasn't thrilled about my relationship with Derek. She had always been the one to command attention, and now here was her younger, less accomplished sister with a partner who was, by all accounts, more accomplished than her. Derek was well respected in his field, had made a name for himself in tech, and had a reputation for being kind and generous. My sister never hid her disapproval of our relationship. To her, Derek was a threat, another person who could overshadow her, the one who had always been at the center of our family's narrative. Angela was passive-aggressive about it, making snide comments at family gatherings and pretending to be supportive while clearly undermining Derek at every chance she got. It wasn't overt, but I could feel the subtle tension, and at the same time, I felt torn. I had always been so used to being in Angela's shadow, trying to earn my parents' approval. I never wanted to be in a position where I had to choose between my sister and my husband, but I found myself constantly having to make excuses for Angela, who couldn't seem to stand the idea of anyone else getting even a fraction of the attention she believed she deserved. But things took a more serious turn when Derek was offered a job at a company that Angela worked for. The company had recently expanded into financial technology integration, and Derek's expertise in that area made him the perfect candidate. It wasn't just any job. It was a position that would help Derek make a significant impact. His new role would allow him to overhaul the company's existing processes and introduce new, cutting-edge technology to streamline their operations. For the first time in my life, I felt like we were both heading towards something big. And then came Angela's reaction. At first, I thought it was just her usual competitiveness, sisterly rivalry, nothing too unusual. But it didn't take long to realize Angela had a personal stake in this. She had been working at this company for years, and she was protective of her status. I started noticing that, instead of offering help or advice, Angela began to subtly undermine Derek in conversations. Whenever someone would mention Derek's new position, Angela would launch into stories about how hard the role was, how much pressure he would be under, how she had already done similar work, and how she didn't see how Derek's approach could possibly be better. The tipping point came when Derek started his new job. Angela was quick to take issue with everything he did, from his methods of integrating new software to his interactions with colleagues. She made sly remarks about his qualifications, suggesting that his success was purely based on connections and luck. It was frustrating, but what truly shocked me was when Derek was suddenly accused of falsifying his resume just 2 weeks after he started. The accusations were absurd. Derek was one of the most meticulous and honest people I knew, but Angela, it seemed, had been working behind the scenes. She'd forged documents, planted false evidence, and made it look like Derek had lied about his qualifications. The company, of course, believed her. Derek was fired. He lost everything, his reputation, his new job, his dreams. I was livid, and when I confronted Angela, she didn't even flinch. She defended her actions, claiming that Derek wasn't a good fit for the company and that it wasn't her fault that he'd misrepresented himself. I knew this wasn't about the job. Angela wasn't just trying to protect her professional turf. This was about something deeper. She couldn't stand the idea of someone else succeeding when she felt she was the one who should always be on top. But what hurt the most wasn't Angela's betrayal. It was the fact that our parents, as usual, sided with her. They dismissed Derek's firing as a misunderstanding, something to be chalked up to bad luck. They couldn't see that it was all part of Angela's strategy to maintain control. When I tried to stand up for Derek and defend him against Angela's false accusations, they blamed me for stirring the pot, for disrupting the family peace. It was painful to watch. I had spent my life trying to earn my parents' approval, and now I was questioning everything I'd believed about them. How could they not see through Angela's manipulations? How could they be so blind to the fact that their beloved daughter had ruined Derek's career out of jealousy? I wanted to stand up for what was right, but I felt alone. I felt like I was fighting a battle on all fronts, against my sister, against my parents, and even against myself, trying to figure out where my loyalty truly lay. But little did I know, this was only the beginning. Everything seemed to spiral out of control after Derek's firing, but it wasn't just the job loss that bothered me. It was the fact that Angela had orchestrated the whole thing. There was no doubt in my mind anymore. This wasn't a case of professional rivalry. Angela wasn't just trying to protect her position at work. She was actively trying to destroy Derek's life. She saw him as a threat to her status, to her carefully constructed world where she always had the upper hand. But it wasn't just Derek she targeted. As time passed, I realized Angela's manipulations went much deeper, and I wasn't the only one affected. She had been working behind the scenes for years, weaving a web of deceit and undermining everyone around her. I learned that the hard way when my wife, Libby, started working at the same company as Angela. Libby and I had been married for 3 years by then. She was everything Angela wasn't: smart, capable, down to earth, and never one to brag. Libby had a background in software engineering and, like me, she didn't grow up with privilege. Her family wasn't wealthy, and she didn't have the same resources or advantages as Angela, but she was hardworking and talented, and that's what had gotten her to where she was. It's what made her stand out in a crowd of people who often valued appearances more than actual merit. Libby had recently been offered a position at the same company where Angela worked. Her role was to help integrate new financial technologies into the company's operations. It was a perfect fit for her expertise, and I was excited about the opportunity. Finally, we'd be working in the same industry, which seemed like a nice bonus. But I didn't anticipate how much Angela would resent it. From the moment Libby walked through the door, Angela began to subtly undermine her at every turn. It wasn't obvious at first. At family dinners, Angela would make small, sarcastic comments about Libby's background, like how someone without a proper corporate pedigree could never truly understand the intricacies of financial tech. She'd scoff at Libby's accomplishments, dismissing them as luck or easy breaks. What I initially thought were just little jabs soon revealed themselves to be part of a much bigger scheme. I first became suspicious when Libby started coming home exhausted, more so than usual. She loved her job, but she felt constantly drained by the covert hostility coming from Angela. I encouraged her to talk to me about it, but she didn't want to complain. She was always the type of person who preferred to take on challenges without burdening others. But one evening, Libby opened up, and the weight of what she shared hit me like a ton of bricks. Angela wasn't just making passive-aggressive remarks. She was actively sabotaging Libby's chances at success. It started with small things: undermining Libby in meetings, questioning her decisions in front of others, planting doubts in the minds of her colleagues. She made it seem like Libby was overstepping or out of her depth. I confronted Angela about it, but as usual, she was charming, dismissing everything I said with a cold smile and an excuse. "Libby just doesn't understand the way things work around here. I'm just trying to help her," she said. But I knew better. Things escalated quickly. 2 weeks after Libby started, she was blindsided by a formal accusation from the company. They claimed she had falsified her resume. The accusation was completely unfounded. Libby had always been honest about her qualifications and experience. But Angela, with her meticulous planning and manipulative tactics, had forged documents that made it appear as though Libby had lied about her credentials. She had fabricated false evidence and fed it to HR, knowing that the company would react swiftly, without considering the truth. When Libby was fired, I was in complete shock. I couldn't believe what Angela had done. But as I tried to piece things together, it became clear that Angela's jealousy had gone too far. This wasn't just a matter of professional rivalry. Angela had seen Libby as a direct threat. Libby had the potential to expose Angela's own insecurities, to show the company that someone with true integrity and skill could achieve success regardless of their background. That terrified Angela. She couldn't stand the idea of someone like Libby proving that hard work and talent trumped everything else. The worst part wasn't just Angela's betrayal, it was the way our parents reacted. They sided with her, of course. They always had. From the moment Angela accused Libby of lying, our parents believed her, no questions asked. They never even thought to give Libby the benefit of the doubt. Instead, they told her to move on and find another job. There's no point in making a fuss, they said. Let it go and start fresh. But how could Libby let go of something so unjust? How could she just turn the other cheek when everything had been stolen from her? And how could my parents be so blind to the truth? I didn't know what to do. I wanted to defend Libby, but my loyalty to my family, especially Angela, had always been a burden. I'd spent my entire life trying to please my parents, trying to make them proud of me. Now, I was being forced to choose between my wife and my sister. How could I continue to pretend that everything was fine when I knew Angela was actively trying to ruin Libby's career? How could I live with myself knowing that my family was complicit in this toxic behavior? I didn't know it at the time, but this was just the beginning of a much darker and more complicated journey. The more I dug into what was happening, the more I realized that Angela wasn't just a jealous sister. She was someone capable of far worse things. And my family's complicity in her actions would soon unravel everything I had believed about them. I had always been loyal to my family. Maybe it was because I'd spent so many years being the underdog, always striving to get approval from them, trying to keep up with my older sister, Angela. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. She was the first in our family to earn a degree from an Ivy League school, the one who landed high-paying jobs right out of college, the one who everyone looked up to. And in the quiet spaces between her accomplishments, I'd always felt like I was shadowed by her. But my loyalty to Angela had been unwavering until Libby came into my life. I never expected to end up caught in this web of deceit, manipulation, and betrayal. But the more I learned about what Angela had done to Libby, the more I realized I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I couldn't let it slide, even if my parents wanted me to. I couldn't stand by and watch my wife get destroyed by the woman I once thought I knew. The breaking point came when Angela hit rock bottom. It wasn't the firing that did it, or even her underhanded campaign to destroy Libby's career. No, it was when Angela's own world began to collapse around her. The truth, as it always does, found a way to seep out into the light. Angela had spent years building her professional persona. She was known in her industry as a high performer, someone who could be trusted to deliver results, someone who was untouchable. But behind closed doors, Angela was playing a different game. She had been manipulating her department's performance numbers for years, inflating them to make herself look better than she actually was. It wasn't just about keeping up appearances. It was about feeding her insatiable need for validation, her constant hunger for control. Her team's results were fabricated, client accounts that didn't exist, deals that hadn't been signed, revenue that wasn't real. Angela had even set up shell companies to create the illusion of success. She had the perfect formula for success. Fake it until you make it. But she went too far. She had crossed a line that couldn't be undone, and the walls were closing in. The tipping point came when Libby's role in the company put her in direct contact with the financial systems Angela had been tampering with. Libby's job was to integrate new financial technologies, which meant she would eventually have access to the very data that could expose Angela's fraud. It wasn't that Libby wanted to expose Angela. It was that she was just doing her job, doing what she was hired to do. But Angela knew what was at stake. She couldn't let Libby have access to the numbers. She couldn't let anyone see the truth. So, Angela did what she always did when she felt threatened. She moved quickly, she manipulated, she controlled the narrative. Libby was fired under the guise of having falsified her resume, an accusation that couldn't have been further from the truth. And just like that, Angela had removed the only real threat to her carefully constructed world. But Libby didn't just take it lying down. No, she fought back. She wouldn't let Angela's lies stand. Libby gathered evidence. She contacted people who knew the truth, and she began to expose the lies. And that's when things really started to unravel. When I saw the depth of Angela's actions, I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't just petty rivalry. This was a calculated effort to ruin a person's life, to destroy someone who had done nothing wrong. Angela had not only sabotaged Libby's career, but had also manipulated everyone around her, including our parents, into believing her version of the story. And when the truth began to surface, I realized that our family had been complicit in this mess for far too long. I wasn't the only one who started to see the truth. My younger sister, Emily, who had always been close to Angela, was the first to break away. She had known something wasn't right. She had been the one to see through Angela's lies years ago, but she'd never spoken up. Emily came to me one night, her face pale and full of regret. She had found out that Angela had sabotaged her own career years ago, back when Emily had tried to apply for a job at Angela's company. Angela had fabricated false allegations about Emily, claiming that she had been incompetent, just to make sure her own position remained secure. Emily had always believed Angela when she said it was just business, but now she knew better. Emily was devastated. She'd trusted Angela completely, and now the reality of her sister's betrayal hit hard. She was the first to go to the police to bring the full extent of Angela's lies and manipulation to light, and that's when everything fell apart. The final straw came when Angela, cornered and desperate, exploded. She accused Emily of being disloyal and of betraying her for personal gain. And when Emily tried to stand up for herself, Angela became violent. She was so consumed by rage that she physically attacked Emily, forcing her to call the police. The police arrived just in time to witness Angela's breakdown. It was clear that she had reached the end of the line. Her empire of lies had crumbled, and she was left with nothing. Our parents, as expected, sided with Angela. They refused to believe what had happened. They refused to accept that their precious daughter was capable of such deceit. Instead, they blamed Emily and me for attacking Angela when she was already down. They claimed that we had misinterpreted the situation and that Angela had simply been trying to protect her career. But how could they not see the truth? How could they continue to defend her when the evidence was clear? I was caught in a storm of emotions. On one hand, I felt betrayed by my own flesh and blood, by my parents, who had always shown such favoritism toward Angela. On the other hand, I was determined to protect Libby and Emily from the fallout of Angela's actions. I knew I had to stand up for what was right, no matter what the cost. But the cost was higher than I ever anticipated. As the investigation into Angela's fraud began, more shocking details emerged. Details that implicated not just Angela, but also our parents. They had been complicit in helping Angela hide her embezzled funds, covering up her lies, and using their legal connections to protect her. I couldn't believe it. My parents, the people I had trusted most in the world, had been actively involved in helping Angela cover up her crimes. I was disgusted. It became clear that my family was no longer the family I had once known. I was forced to make a decision. Do I continue to protect them, or do I stand up for what is right? And the answer for me was clear. I had to protect the people who truly mattered: Libby, Emily, and myself. As the investigation into Angela's financial crimes progressed, I realized that my relationship with my family was irreparably damaged. There was no going back, but I wasn't alone. Libby and Emily stood by me, and together we would face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Things started spiraling after Angela's breakdown. It wasn't just the police, though that alone was bad enough, but the lies she started spreading to everyone. Angela had always been the one who controlled the narrative, and now, with everything falling apart, she went into full damage control. Her first move was to launch a smear campaign against Libby, trying to paint her as the villain. She told the extended family that Libby was sabotaging her career and taking credit for her work. Angela even had the audacity to accuse Libby of using me to climb the corporate ladder, as if my relationship with her had any impact on her success. It was a cruel move, and what hurt the most was how easily most of the family believed it. I should have known better, but I still held on to this naive hope that my family would see through the lies. Instead, they sided with Angela, the golden child. She was always the perfect one, the one they admired, so it was easier for them to believe her version of events. The calls and messages accusing Libby of manipulating me were nonstop. I was told I was blinded, that I was betraying my sister. But it wasn't just the family, it was our parents too. They weren't just standing by, they were defending Angela. My mother even said that Libby had manipulated me into turning against Angela. The idea that my wife was somehow the mastermind behind everything was beyond absurd, but they couldn't see it. Then Emily, my younger sister, who had always been close to Angela, finally spoke out. She confronted our parents with everything she had discovered: Angela's sabotage of Libby, her fraudulent activities, and the manipulation. Emily had evidence: emails, texts, even a police report from when Angela had threatened her. And when our parents saw it, they didn't deny it. They just tried to deflect. But the more they defended Angela, the more they revealed their own involvement in her lies. It turned out our parents hadn't just ignored Angela's actions. They had helped her. They'd concealed her financial crimes, using their legal connections to cover up the embezzlement. The truth was ugly, and it broke me. I thought I knew my parents, but they were willing to protect Angela at any cost, even if it meant destroying everything else. And in the end, I realized there was no going back. Our family was shattered, and I had to make a choice: stay with the people who had betrayed me or stand with those who never had. I chose Libby, and I never looked back. I thought I had seen the worst of it, but everything changed the day Rachel reached out to Libby. Rachel, a former co-worker of Thelma's, had been in the trenches with her for years and had witnessed the dark side of Thelma's professional persona. Rachel had kept quiet for a long time, scared of the consequences, but when she saw how Thelma was going after Libby, ruining her career with lies and false accusations, something inside Rachel snapped. She couldn't stay silent any longer. When Rachel finally shared her information with Libby, it felt like the ground beneath us shifted. Thelma's jealousy had been a small part of the story, nothing more than a smokescreen to cover up something much more sinister. Rachel had uncovered evidence of Thelma's criminal activities at work, and she had been quietly compiling proof for months. The truth was worse than we could have imagined. Thelma had been embezzling money from the company for years, over $2.5 million, by manipulating the financials, setting up fake client accounts, and forging contracts. She was even using shell businesses to move the funds and conceal her tracks. Rachel had gathered all the evidence: screenshots of falsified accounts, email threads that linked Thelma to fraudulent activities, and proof of the offshore accounts where the stolen money was funneled. It was clear that Thelma's entire career had been built on lies. What truly sent shockwaves through our family was that Libby's new role in the company was the one thing that could have exposed Thelma. Libby was an expert in financial technology and auditing, and her position would have allowed her to easily spot the discrepancies in Thelma's department. It wasn't just professional rivalry that motivated Thelma to destroy Libby's career. It was fear that Libby would uncover the truth, and Thelma's entire empire of fraud would come crashing down. When we shared the evidence with the police and the company's internal investigation team, everything started to fall into place. Thelma had carefully orchestrated her schemes to hide the trail of stolen money, but once the investigation began, the pieces came together quickly. She had been using her position to manipulate performance metrics, falsify records, and embezzle funds. She had even gone as far as to blackmail employees, threatening to ruin their careers if they spoke out. The company was horrified by what they discovered. They had no idea that one of their most trusted managers had been leading such an extensive fraud operation. But it wasn't just Thelma who had to answer for her actions. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that our parents had been complicit in covering up the crime. I still couldn't believe it when we found out that our parents had been helping Thelma conceal the stolen money. They had set up offshore accounts, moved the funds around, and even used their legal connections to ensure that Thelma wasn't caught. When we confronted them, their response was chilling. They didn't seem sorry for what they had done. Instead, They justified their actions by claiming they were just protecting their daughter. They said they were helping her because she was family, and that's what families do, right? I was disgusted. This wasn't about family loyalty. It was about enabling a criminal, protecting someone who had no remorse for the damage she had caused. When I asked them how they could live with themselves, they claimed that Libby had manipulated the situation, that if she hadn't been so rigid in her job choices, none of this would have happened. They blamed Libby for exposing Thelma's wrongdoing, as if we were supposed to turn a blind eye to the truth just to keep the family together. The depth of their involvement hit me like a ton of bricks. My parents, who I had trusted my entire life, had chosen to stand by Thelma, even when it was clear she had been destroying lives, including mine. They were willing to risk their own integrity to protect her, even after all the damage she had caused. But the most painful realization was that they weren't even sorry. Not for the fraud, not for their role in covering it up, and certainly not for the hurt they had caused me, Libby, and Amy. They were only sorry they had been caught. They had lost their legal practice, their social status, and their reputation in the community. And instead of owning up to their actions, they continued to deflect and blame others. At this point, I knew there was no turning back. The family I had once known and trusted no longer existed. It had been replaced by a toxic, deceitful web of lies and manipulation. And the truth, no matter how painful, had to come to light. It wasn't just about confronting Thelma. It was about finally acknowledging the betrayal that had been lurking in the shadows for years. With everything exposed, I couldn't shake the feeling of deep betrayal. But at the same time, I also felt a sense of clarity. I could no longer pretend that these were just family squabbles. This was far beyond that. It was about standing up for what was right, even when the people closest to you were the ones who had caused the harm. The final chapter of this nightmare came in the form of Thelma's attempt to flee the country. 2 weeks ago, she was arrested at the Canadian border for attempting to enter with forged documents. It wasn't a surprise to me that she tried to escape. After all, with the evidence stacking against her, she had nowhere left to run. But the way she'd tried to manipulate the system one last time, using her family's connections, was the final insult. In the end, Thelma accepted a plea bargain. She was sentenced to 3 years of supervised release and 2 years in federal prison for embezzlement and securities fraud. The case was far more complex than anyone had anticipated. Not only had Thelma been siphoning millions, but she had also been blackmailing employees to cover her tracks, including Libby and Amy. Her criminal network was far-reaching, and the damage she'd caused stretched beyond just our family. Meanwhile, Libby, who had been wrongfully fired and tarnished for years, found justice. Her former employer, after the public revelations, offered her a formal apology and a generous compensation package. They reinstated her to her former position with a promotion, full back pay, and a promise to improve their company's policies on discrimination and fraud. Watching Libby finally get the recognition she deserved after everything Thelma had tried to destroy was the one silver lining in this entire ordeal. As for my parents, their role in covering up Thelma's crimes led to the destruction of their own lives. They were forced to leave their legal practice due to the public backlash, and their reputation was irreparably damaged. They tried to salvage what little dignity they had left by blaming everyone else, including Libby, but the truth had come out, and there was no escaping it. Amy, with the support of Libby and me, is slowly rebuilding her life. She's finding her footing again, free from the toxic environment our parents created. As for me, I've cut ties with them completely. My wife and I have blocked them from all communication channels, and we've chosen to build our own family, one based on honesty, integrity, and support. We've learned that sometimes the family you choose is far more important than the family you're born into, and though this entire journey has been painful, it's ultimately brought us closer. The scars may never fully heal, but they've made us stronger, and for that, I'm grateful.